So, Scott, thank you for joining us on the webinar. This is the first one that we're going to do, and we're basically discussing how this shift to remote work is affecting both management and employees, what changes you're seeing. And if you will, start off and just tell us a little bit about Cloudinary, what you guys are up to.
Yeah, so Cloudinary is a great company. We were founded about 8 years ago. One of the things that makes Cloudinary a little bit unique, especially in terms of venture-funded Silicon Valley companies, is Cloudinary has never raised any outside capital. So it's a completely bootstrapped organization, number one. And then number two, it's a profitable company. We were just written up in TechCrunch a couple of weeks ago talking about the foundation of the business and kind of what it's like to bootstrap a company up into the kind of $60 million in ARR range.
Nice.
What the company does at a very high level is that for companies that have a large number of digital assets, if you think about the Nikes, the Adidases, the Mediavines, like are some of our largest customers. So these organizations that have large number of digital assets, whether that is video or imagery or AR, VR, 360, whatever that might be, that they want to get out to their clients in a faster way. Cloudinary makes it very simple to go directly from photo shoot to manipulating those images in terms of size, in terms of format, in terms of look and feel to the website. And for some of our clients, we're able to accelerate that process from a couple of weeks to a couple of hours.
Okay, cool. I mean, that sounds like a pretty interesting business, actually.
It's a great business and really good people.
Okay. So how do you balance management needs with trust when trying to work with this shift to remote workers? So I was reading something lately that says that research is showing that people perform best and stay with a company longer when they feel trusted, but then at the same time, it's risky to give too much leeway to your remote teams. So what do you
Yeah.
think about that?
Well, one of the advantages that I have, I've always run sales organizations, and even going back as far as 2000 when I was at WebEx, and we opened up an office. We were headquartered in San Jose. We opened up an office in Sacramento, and I had a few people that lived in Sacramento that were working for me. So I have a little bit of in sales, you have a little bit of an advantage around the trust factor in that most enterprise salespeople tend to work in the field. So for salespeople, at least, working remotely isn't a foreign concept to most of us. The trust thing, though, it's an important thing, and there's a couple of things that you can do to help manage that. One is like you just need to tell people, right? Part of like being a good leader is just encouraging people to take a little bit of risk, but also making sure that you are telling them that you trust them, and when they want to make a decision, when they're doing something like if somebody wants to take their kid to the park or has to take their kid used to have to take their kid to school or whatever, it's like, hey, look, like you're a grown up. I trust that you're going to get your job done, and go do your thing. And I find that like when you tell somebody that over and over and over again, like that kind of sets in. And I tend to, and maybe this is a naive way of looking at the world, but I tend to trust people more than I don't trust them. And I assume that the people that I hire or the people that are on my team are adults and they know how to get things done, whether they're working in a remote fashion. I do think like in this current day and age, though, where everybody is remote, there's some really interesting opportunities that kind of new managers who are managing people remotely for the first time need to take advantage of. One is just any type of kind of comparative data, like the things that you want to manage, you have to start measuring. So take advantage of things like Gainsight, take advantage of things like Salesforce, take advantage of things like Okta or Tableau or anything like that to start to get those metrics surfaced on a daily basis. So that way the people can at least see what they're being managed against and how they're stack ranking against the other people on the team. So for example, like, a really easy one in sales is, how many phone calls are you making? How many emails are you sending? Right? And if you look at the team and you go, okay, well, the average person on the team is sending 50 emails a day and making 50 dials a day, like that becomes your baseline. And whether you are in the office with 40 of your peers or you're at home by yourself, like you still have to hit that baseline one way or the other. So I think it's really important to surface that data. And I think that to build that trust, surfacing that data a lot goes a long way. And then the second thing is like, I don't think that you can be too over communicative around goals and expectations when you have remote workers, right? You really want to very clearly explain, like, this is what I expect you to do and by this time. And really just kind of manage those things and get buy-in from people and say, look, like, I expect that you're going to hit your 50 dials a day, every day, and kind of tell me what you need in order to make that happen. And then the third thing is like, you just got to pick up the phone. Like Zoom goes a long way, but like just picking up the phone and like calling everybody on your team all the time, right? And I'm spending probably 45 minutes a day times X number of people. Like it's just that constant check in, and especially in this day and age where um, people are scared, people are nervous. This is a very new world that none of us have experienced, and I think that it's okay to be afraid and to have these kinds of emotions, and just kind of checking in on the people to see like truly how they're doing as people, not necessarily how they're doing as your employee. When you can do that, that goes a long way in showing that level of trust too.
I agree with that totally. I think that caring is legitimately the foundation of trust. If you show people that you care about them implicitly,
Yeah.
you know, and what you were saying also in terms of hiring. So when you hire people, right, it's kind of this obstacle. How do you know you're hiring the right people? But do your best in the hiring process. And if you hire people um, who are really good people, then the trust shouldn't be an issue in the long term.
Right.
And a lot of things, like you said, reaching out, picking up the phone, making the effort to stay in touch with people, especially now, is huge. Which actually brings up another point. So I was reading an article recently about an astronaut, and this
That was a
astronaut
great
is,
article.
yeah. And so yeah, I sent it to you, and he's giving his input on like the effects of isolation, and who would know
Yeah.
better, right? So what input do you have about that article, or what advice would you add to this? Because isolation is hard, right? We need people, we need to be around each other. How can remote teams who are used to having like this fun office environment, grab a coffee together, chat together, all of this, how can you keep this going?
Um, so there's a couple of things like we're doing now. We're doing virtual coffee talks 3 times a week, where I just get the team together, and I've really sat down and have said, look, like, this isn't the opportunity to talk about work. I don't want this to be an opportunity to talk about the pandemic. Like, those are the two things that are off the table. Um, it has a tendency to, kind of the latest trends that we've been talking about during these coffee talks are like, what are you binging on Netflix or whatever? Or what workout are you doing? And I hope that it turns into some of us, and some of us now are doing it, like, we're holding one another accountable to at least go exercise on a regular basis. So that's one thing to do. I think though, like, if you're not used to it, certainly having that touch, that regular touch with your friends. I've done a couple of virtual happy hours with my friends, where you just sit back at the desk with a beer and you call your buddies up and they're having a glass of wine and just shoot the shit a little bit. Um, but I think, like, if this is the first time that you have done something like this and you are in kind of a quasi, at least knock wood, we're in quasi isolation right now versus Italy or China or India right now, where it's like full on lockdown.
Or outer
Um,
space?
yeah, or outer space, right? Like, it's a great opportunity to start a new hobby. And he talked about that a bit in that article. Um, but like, it's amazing, like, how there's so many resources to be able to go learn something, and like what you're trying to do is like kind of keep yourself just mentally sane, right? You don't want to just be like, okay, I'm going to be all in on work, and then all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy kind of thing. Like, you need to find something to do. And I think, like, there's going to be a lot of changes in hobbies, right? Like, I'm trying to figure out, like, okay, if I can't go play golf on a regular basis, like, what am I going to do around the house? Like, maybe I should learn to play an instrument. Like, maybe I should read more. Maybe I should take up gardening. Like, there's things that you can do, but you have to kind of, you have to try a bunch of different things until you find that thing that clicks. I think that if you're an astronaut, kind of going up into the ISS, he probably had some time beforehand to think about what his hobby would be, instead of just like all of a sudden, you know, now you're stuck at home. Like, what are you going to do? Like, I'll try gardening a couple of times, and if I like it, great. And if I don't like it, then, I'll defer to somebody else.
And choose
Um,
carefully if you're going to space, right? You don't want to take a
yeah,
Rubik's Cube
exactly.
and be stuck for 6 months with something you can't figure out.
Right. Exercise is so critical. I mean, it's especially, I think that you have to stay fit. Like, it's so much easier now to be like, oh, I'll just like go upstairs to the cookie jar, or I'll go upstairs and I'll grab a bag of chips, or I'll go upstairs and, I'll have a beer at night or have a glass of wine at night. Like, so you got to have to like really make sure that you are kind of taking care of yourself, because that goes a long way in helping your mental fortitude. And for me, at least, like, I'm a big to-do list guy. Like, I hate seeing like the open boxes on my to-do list. And when about a week into the self-isolation or the stay-at-home shelter in place that they put in California, like, I created a monster to-do list, like all like the little projects around the house that I've been meaning to get done. Like, everything from like, who, like, nobody ever cleans out their dryer vents. Like, now I've got that on my to-do list. I've got to touch up paint in like different places where I got to go deal with that. I've got to, change light bulbs, and like, I want to read more, and I got like a stack of books now that I can go attack. Like, just like, having that like to-do list, like, taped to the refrigerator, that's always taunting you, saying like, oh, like, instead of sitting down and binge watching like 3 episodes of Love Is Blind, like, why don't you work on this project that you have listed here? So I think those things, like, it's a little bit, it's everybody has different isolation though, right? Like, I'm very lucky. I live in the suburbs and I've got a garden, and I've got, I can go out to the parks, and it's California, so the weather's pretty nice all the time. Other people, like, if you're in, you know, Spain and you're in a 600 square foot flat and you are isolated there, like, it's going to be a lot more applicable to the ISS guy than it is my world. So it's really kind of figuring out what is it that's going to keep you sane during that time frame based on the square footage that you're kind of dealing with.
But I think those are good. That's so a quick rundown. You had, let's see, accountability, professional development, and exercise, I would say, were like the three overarching topics. So those are solid. Those are really
Yeah.
solid. And it's an interesting time, because, like all of the families who are at home and who are homeschooling kids, you find all these people who are like digging as much as they can to find all of these homeschooling resources for their kids.
Yeah.
And I think that that's cool too, because like all of these communities are coming together. You got people creating whole Facebook groups for like the whatever it is, teach your kids at home stuff. And I just been looking at some of the things that my friends are posting, and like they're finding these amazing games and all these fun activities and stuff that like the creativity really comes alive, right? Because it has to. It's like a very, very long rainy day, we're stuck inside for a little while. It's cool to see what people are getting into. Yeah. So how does this remote work shift affect your company the most? And that can be at an employee level. It can be at
Yeah.
a revenue level. Actually, it could be just about anything.
Um, like, so far from a revenue level, so far so good. Most of our clients are media and e-commerce, which, if you're over a certain threshold, in size, right? Like, if you're over like 10 or $15 million in an e-commerce revenue, like, you'll probably weather the storm because people are at home, they're still shopping online, they're still doing retail therapy, they're still, like, you'll probably have a bit of a boom. And, from a media standpoint, like, everybody is just online right now devouring the media. So, knock wood, we've been able to kind of have a little bit of a dodge right now. Like, some of our clients are trying to figure it out because they're going through like the same thing. They're like, hey, all of a sudden, like, all of our employees are working from home, so we can't focus on this particular project right now because we're trying to figure out how to get 5,000 laptops to people who can't come into the office now. Or we're trying to figure out, like, how do we set up VPNs for them, and like all like the stuff that you have to do to have a remote workforce. Um, so like, that's been a bit of a challenge, but for the most part, like, we've been very lucky. I think, like, the one thing at the company is, um, we have offices in 3 countries. So we are headquartered in Tel Aviv, but we've got an office in London and an office in Santa Clara. But we also have employees who are in like 8 or 9 different countries, so kind of scattered around, working out of their homes. But it's still been a bit of a shift. And I think, like, one of the things that the company is doing that has just been great is, we've invested very heavily in learning and development for the employees. So in their spare time, if they want to learn a skill, they can invest in that. we're doing a lot of virtual things. I mentioned virtual happy hours earlier, but we're doing virtual yoga classes and virtual book club and virtual, some of the people are like, some of the employees are volunteering to read to kids. So there's like virtual story time to distract the kids away. It's an incredibly social company. And I think that the people really miss that, right? We every morning there's like a communal breakfast, there's communal lunch, like, and people like really do get together and genuinely spend that time to get to know their colleagues. And that's something that is missed quite a bit at Cloudinary.
Yeah, it sounds like you're seeing a lot of the best of people really shine, like during a difficult time.
A lot of the, sorry, what?
It sounds like you're seeing a lot of the best of people really come out and shine during a difficult time.
Well, not only you kind of see the two extremes, right? Like if you have any kind of faults, they tend to get exaggerated in a bad time, but all of your good stuff tends to get exaggerated at the same time. So, what I'm hoping comes out of this is people realize like, oh, you know what, I had this fault, and it became so exaggerated during the bad time, I was able to adjust it. So yeah, you kind of get it starts to accentuate the extremes.
Okay, that's cool. That's cool. So, in addition to this, like, do you see any other major benefits to this remote work period? And what do you hope happens as a result of this?
It's going to be really interesting to see what happens with real estate, like commercial real estate in particular. All of a sudden, I mean, let's paint a doom and gloom scenario, right? Doom and gloom scenario is like high street retailers and restaurants all go out of business, and now you have all of this like open commercial real estate for retail and restaurants. You also have a lot of companies who are probably going to recognize like, hey, we're spending. I mean, I don't know what our rent at Cloudinary is, but at my last company, we were spending like $300,000 or $400,000 a year in, or sorry, yeah, 300 or 400. What was the rent? Yeah, like close to $2 million a year in rent. Like a lot of companies, I hope, are going to recognize like, hey, we don't need to spend $2 million a year in rent. Like on a big office in Silicon Valley and another office in New York and another office in London. Like that's just like, all of a sudden, like if you have an extra $2 million in your bottom line, like you can do a lot with that. And I think like there's going to be some really interesting things that come out of that. Like you might have like a lot of big empty office buildings. Um, does it make sense that NVIDIA is building a multi-billion-dollar campus down the street from us right now? Like they may realize like that wasn't a good investment because now all of their employees are working from home and they don't need to do that. So it'll be interesting to see like what happens to all of that empty space when people realize like, hey, maybe we don't necessarily need to have a big office. Maybe we have a smaller office and people that want to come in and socialize, come and do that. And people that want to just work from home, we were successful with it. So I think like that's going to be interesting. And I don't think a lot of companies are going to go back to spending like that kind of money on an office.
So you think the shift is kind of here to stay? Not to cut you off, but it sounds like you think this shift is going to have much longer term implications than just, hey guys, work at home for a couple weeks.
Well, first of all, like I don't think it's going to be a couple of weeks. Like, California came out at the beginning of March and said Bay Area shelter in place on March 6th, I think is when it went into effect. California went into effect on the 14th or something like that, a week later. So I've been sheltering in place now since the first week of March. Most of the companies in Silicon Valley forced work from home on March 1st. So like Facebook, Microsoft, LinkedIn, like all like Synopsys, like a lot of the bigger companies just started to force it on March the 1st. And now yesterday, the announcement came out that California is not going back to school until May the 1st, at least. So I think like this is not going to be like, oh, hey, this is like 14 days in and out. I think that this is going to be, we're looking at, probably the end of June. And, so it will be like a long, like 3 or 4 month experiment for a lot of these organizations. And are people going to want to just like jump right back in day one after a pandemic? Probably not. So you're probably going to have people who are like, I'm not so sure about that. I'm going to stay at home now until the end of July. And now you're like at 5 months of like working from home. And the lights are still going on at the company, the customers are still coming in, they're still being supported. Like all of these things are happening. And so I think long term, like people might just say, look, like we don't need to make that investment anymore.
Right. Right.
Um, on a positive side though, like I think like one of the positives that is likely going to come out of this is that I think like, and you're already seeing this, you pointed it out earlier, like, there's a lot of really cool creative things that are coming out of this now. Like the art that's coming out of this, the music that's coming out of this, the new companies that are being launched out of this, like new ideas that are like coming forth. Like there's a lot of really cool things. And I think that a large number of people are going to kind of go like, you know what, like I never really liked being in accounting, and I always had this passion for jewelry making, and I've just spent the last 3 months locked up in my house making jewelry, and now I have this big inventory, and I have a Square or some type of website where I can sell this, and like that's going to become their job, and they're going to get out of their kind of corporate 9 to 5, and they're going to go into being entrepreneurs on their own. And I think like a lot of people are going to reflect back on this time and go like, that was like a big turning point in my life where I realized I wasn't passionate about what I had been doing for 10, 15, 20 years before that. And now I'm doing X as a result.
Okay. Okay. If I may, I'm just curious. I want to shift back to, if this does stay a long-term thing, then I guess keeping employees like productive without micromanaging too much, making sure they have the right tools. How do you keep a workplace culture? Like how do you keep people together? And you may know, I guess you'll know better about this than me anyway, since you have remote employees in 8 different locations, 8 different countries, as you said.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious about that. Like, how do you build a strong company culture when you're not all in the office together? You mentioned some coffee chats. What else? How do you keep strong workplace culture going? How do you keep productivity up? And how do you keep people motivated?
Um, Motivation has to come from the person themselves, right? Like it's like they need to be motivated, right? Like we don't live in this era of, well, we'll just the beatings will continue until morale improves. Like that's not like how the world works. So I think like you need to like, part of what I do as a manager, and I do this whether it's my remote employees or whether it's people in the office, is like I always look at like what people's goals, gaps, and motivators are. And I think like this is something that is critical for any manager, is to sit down with their employees and say on a quarterly basis and talk about what are their goals. Like, and that can be business goals. Oh, hey, I want to make my number. Or it could be personal goals. Like I'm trying to buy a house. I want to, lose 10 pounds. I want to go on vacation. I want to buy a car, whatever it might be. Spend a lot of time talking about those goals and really help, like really try to understand what it is that they want to get out of this. The gaps is like, okay, well, like what's keeping you from doing that? Like, what do you have to do in order to get there? And like, let's break those, let's figure out what those gaps are in order to get to that particular goal, right? So a goal might be, I want to sell 100 units. Okay, like what's the gap to keep you from doing that? And you just kind of back into that goal. Like, okay, well, I've got to have 500 meetings. I need to get 1,000 leads. I need to get, so on and so forth. And then like start to talk about what motivates the person, and really start to understand like, okay, like, I have, I'll give you 2 ends of the extreme. Like the oldest person on my team is in his early 60s. The youngest person on my team is in his kind of mid to late 20s. Like their motivations are radically different, right? Like the motivation for the older guy is like, look, I want to like get my 2 kids through college. I want to make sure I can save some money for retirement, and I just want to have like a good time while I'm kind of working out the kind of doing my job. The younger guys like, look, I want to establish my career, and I want to get in a leadership role, and I want to save up some money to buy a house. Like they're 2 very different ways of motivating, and you need to manage those people in unique ways, like in different ways. And I think whether they are in the office or whether they are at home, like you just kind of have to figure out what's that trigger that's going to get people to hit the goals that you want. And you
Yeah.
have to make sure like your goals are aligned with what their goals are.
Yeah, no, that's really unique. I think it goes back to what you were saying initially about trust also, because if you're reaching out to your people, if you're building good relationships, if you're, hey, how's it going? Like showing that you care, right?
Yeah.
Showing that you care builds trust. Building trust, of course, results in people who are willing to go the extra mile. And I think that's interesting. Not to put you on the spot, but I'm curious if you have any So like you said, you have got people at both ends of the spectrum, and they have these goals, you know, buy a house or put their kids through college or whatever. How do you as a manager tie some kind of link between their personal goal, which is really the driver, right?
Yeah.
And them being there at work? You got any tips or advice or ways that you pull these together?
Rephrase the question for me.
No, I'm just curious. So you have the people who are working for you, as you said, they have these goals of like of buy a house or put their kids through college or something like this. And then do you try to make any direct connections where you're like um, trying to tie in how they can get close to those goals? I guess, for instance, in sales, it could be commission or something like this. But I don't know. Do you do anything like any outside of the box ideas? If someone has a goal, like I want to learn to blank, that you can tie into the workplace. Do you try and do that stuff at all, or?
Yeah, so I mean, let me give you like a really rudimentary example. One of the goals for one of the people on my team is to buy a home.
Mhm.
Um, and I happen to live in the neighborhood where he wants to move to. And so periodically, like I will see a listing, or I will like talk to one of my friends who happens to be a realtor. When something comes up, like I'm firing that over to him. Like I want him to hit that. I want him to be able to buy that house. And I think the fast, like selfishly, like when you have a mortgage over your head, like you're going to work a lot harder. But like I want to see this guy be happy, and I want to see him be successful, and I want to see him thrive. And like if this is his goal, and periodically if I can send him a text with like, hey, look, I found this house and it's empty, or there's a coming soon sign in front of it, like, yeah, why wouldn't I send it over to him?
I love it. I love it. I think that's cool. I think that it's great when companies are really taking a direct approach to not just work is work and home is home is all I was getting at with this question.
Yeah,
But if you can find a way to find like what really drives and motivates people, which is often not in the workplace, right? It's often at
yeah,
home. What really drives you is I want to climb a mountain, I want to do whatever. So for instance, with me, a company can be like, hey, you know, if you exceed these Q1 targets, we'll give you 2 days to go play in the mountains. You know, like we'll give you a little extra time, or we'll give you whatever. And that stuff's really
yeah,
appealing to me. I know that in sales, for example, some companies will be like, okay, hey, if you're the seller of the quarter, seller of the month, we'll give you a PlayStation. But for instance, the person who wins it, maybe they don't play video games, and
yeah.
they're like, okay, well, thanks, but it's not motivating. And I was curious if you had tips on like on tying people's motivations into kind of an end result. I guess it revolves a lot around one-on-one chats, just getting to know people and trying to
Yeah.
align some kind of strategy there.
Well, and it's interesting. It's very generational. I had lunch a couple of like right before they locked down California with the very first manager that I ever worked for when I moved to Silicon Valley. And he's a great guy and a good mentor and a good friend. And we were kind of talking about how motivation has changed. Like when we were young, it was like we want the Rolex. Like if you hit your number, you get the Rolex, and like all the salespeople were like flashy. And like now, people don't give a shit about the Rolex. Like they care much more about like something that is experiential in their life, or something that is going to help them in their life. Like you were saying, like go to a mountain. Like I think that if I said, hey, you can have a Rolex, or you can have this opportunity to go on like this unique trip to climb Mount Whitney. Like I think more people want that experience than
Yeah.
they care about like a $5,000 watch that isn't accurate anyway. So everybody's got Apple watches. They don't need a Rolex. Like
Fair enough. Fair enough.
so like
Interesting.
but yeah, you have to sit down and understand what that motivation is for that person, and you have to spend some time really kind of digging into kind of what's driving that person what is driving that person from a personal fulfillment level than a you kind of tangible. You have to really focus on the intangibles much more so than the tangibles.
Yeah, no, I like it. I like the management leadership kind of insights that you're throwing out here. I like that a lot, and I really appreciate it. Um, I guess then, what advice do you have on this topic in general in the remote work? Because we've covered kind of the full spectrum here,
Yeah.
and you know how it's affecting employees, how it's affecting management, you know the future of potential futures of this situation. What advice do you have on this topic in any sphere whatsoever?
I mean, we've kind of hit on them a lot so far, David. Like you cannot be over communicative. I think in a situation like this, like number one, um, the more you talk to your team and the more that you kind of are very clear about goals and the more that you just kind of check in with people and let them know that you care, that's going to go a long way. Like, I think that there's a lot of managers now who are like, this is the first time and they're used to having 20 people in cubes right outside of their office. And now they're like, holy shit, like, I don't know what, like, you can't find Dave because like Dave's out like walking with the dog or like, Dave's not commuting now for 2 hours. So, like, what is Dave doing with that? And like really kind of figuring that out. And I just think like you got to pick up the phone and call these people and just see how they're doing more often than not. And just kind of, whether you have 100 people that report to you or, you probably can't do it with 1,000, but I know you can do it with 100. Like you just, pick up the phone and like take 15 minutes and just call every single one of them and just spend like Monday and Tuesday cranking through that stuff and trying to connect to all of them because it goes a long way. People want to hear.
That's unique. And I guess it's possible. I mean, if this is a long-term thing, we may see kind of a significant shift in leadership and management styles, right? Kind of to much more of a hands-off approach, I guess you could say, where it's hands-on, right? Because you're still keeping track of the people, but you have to give up the ability to be right there in front of the people all the time, And I think possibly there'd be a shift in the types of leadership styles to get that done. So that's cool.
No, I think like there'll be a shift in like I think one of the things that I think is probably going to be hard for a lot of people is that you have to care more about the result than the route that you got to get the result. And that's probably easier for a sales manager to say, like, if you show up on January the 1st and you hit your annual quota, like, fucking go enjoy the year. So as long as like you get the result by the time frame that you need the result in, like the avenue that people take to get there, you can't complain about that too. It's hard to complain about that too much, especially if everybody is remote.
Right. Right. All right. So I think that's about enough time. We're going to try and keep this thing relatively short, but I guess for a closer, I'm going to throw a curveball at you here.
Fire away.
Why should people listen to you and the advice that you provided? So, what's your background? What have you done in life? Like how do you understand this situation so well? I know that you've got quite the history behind you.
That's a smart question. I don't know. I mean, I think so. Here's like, why should they listen to me? Like, they probably shouldn't. They probably should like hear what I have to say and experiment with the things that they like and ignore the things that they don't like. Like, this works for me. I've managed a bunch of good teams. I've been very fortunate that not only have I managed good teams, but I've also had people, when I leave an organization, like when I left my last company, I had about a dozen people that had worked for me call me up and say, like, I'm following you. Like, let me know like when the job is open and I'm ready to go. So like, I would say like that gives me a little bit of credibility in terms of like what I'm doing, and I've made those people successful. That's probably a better question, like for people who have worked for me than for me.
Yeah.
I think like it's a style that works for me and my personality. It may not be the right thing for everybody, but just like anything like this, like you listen to the things and you go, okay, like that one's really good and that one's really stupid, so I'll stick with the good ones and ignore the bad ones.
Yeah. Well, I guess you've been doing something successfully, right? You had some previous experience at Yahoo, and you've been in the game for quite a while, worked for both big and large companies, turned a lot of smaller organizations into large and very successful companies. So that's pretty cool. That's
it's
pretty
been
cool.
fun.
All right. Any parting words, Scott? Anything else?
Pick up the phone and call your people.
Pick up your phone and call your people.
Yeah.
Build trust. Relationships build trust. And with trust, you can do anything, right? Honestly,
Absolutely.
if you have trust, you can do anything.
Absolutely.
All right. I love it. And I think that's an awesome note to end on. Scott, thank you so much for your time. I really sincerely appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I enjoyed it.
Take care.
Cheers.